Welcome to the Court of History. I'm Sean Wilentz with my colleague, writer and historian Sidney Blumenthal. Today we're going to be talking about, well, the core of everything, really. We're going to be talking about the Constitution of the United States and the threat that it is currently under. You know, I read a piece just today by my colleague out at Stanford, Jack Rakoff, talking about how what we've considered up to this point to be a constitutional crisis is really a matter of a constitutional failure that we have seen over the last, more than since Trump was inaugurated, we've seen a failure, a collapse of constitutional norms, of constitutional institutions, really, things instituted by the Constitution, which stood between us and tyranny and are now in a state of failure. It's not a crisis anymore. Things have failed. It's been going on for a while. You know, Sid, July 1st, we're building up to July 4th. It'll be our July 4th episode, in effect. But July 1st marks the first anniversary of a truly dark day in American history. Remember what that is, Sid?
Why don't you remind me?
July 1st, 2025, or 24 rather, was the date that the Supreme Court released its decision in Trump v. U.S., basically giving the president total immunity for all acts considered to be official acts. I wrote about it at the time as the Dred Scott decision of our time, that it opened up as the Dred Scott decision had done what it did. Well, why don't we talk about that actually, Sid? I mean, Dred Scott opened up the possibility or tried to illegalize, in effect, the Republican Party and try to establish slavery as the wave of the future, right?
Well, I think that decision, which is now compounded by the recent decision on nationwide injunctions by federal courts below the Supreme Court, really amount to a Magna Carta for a kingship in the United States. So not only is Dred Scott involved here as a decision, which, and the Dred Scott decision is very interesting in other ways as well, in that it denied any recognition of rights to Blacks, which was a way of destroying the then nascent Republican Party that became the Party of Lincoln. But the way in which Dred Scott was rescinded was through the 14th Amendment, establishing birthright citizenship. And that was the direct response to Dred Scott. And now we have contra Declaration of Independence, a complementary decision, establishing an unchecked and unaccountable executive, like a king.
Exactly. Well, to talk about this and many other issues, we are extremely fortunate, indeed honored to have on hand for the Court of History, J. Michael Luttig. Judge Luttig served as a U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fourth Circuit for 15 years, from 1991 to 2006. Before that, before he was appointed to the federal bench by President George H.W. Bush, he'd served as Assistant Attorney General at the U.S. Department of Justice and Counselor to the Attorney General of the United States. He was Assistant Counsel to the President of the White House from 1981 to 1982 under President Ronald Reagan. And from 1982 to 1983, he was law clerk to then Judge Antonin Scalia of the U.S. Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia Circuit. Judge Luttig, welcome to the Court of History.
Thank you, Sean, and thank you, Sidney. It's really my honor to be on with you today. And in fact, it's an especial honor to be on with you today, this beginning the week of Independence Day 2025, and the signal importance of that day in American history coming up at the end of the week. Thank you for having me.
Well, we're absolutely delighted. And getting back to my favorite president and Sid's favorite president, Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln very famously once remarked that the Constitution of the United States was like a frame around the golden apple, which was the Declaration of Independence, that the Constitution imbues and has imbued within it the basic values proclaimed by the Declaration of Independence. And yet, as you've been writing and we're going to be writing further, Judge, that's really, those basic values are under attack.
They're not just under attack, Sean. They are under vicious attack by the President of the United States of America. To say that this is the first time in American history would be understatement. The founding fathers could have never contemplated this man and this moment in American history. But we know from what they wrote at the time, in anticipation of the worst possible, that this is the moment that they feared that we would surrender our own democracy and rule of law to a demagogue president of the United States. And indeed, that's what we have done. I was asked to drop in a Supreme Court symposium down the hill the other day, and I spoke for 5 or 10 minutes, and then the moderator asked me this question. Said, Judge, are we in danger of losing our republic? And I paused for a moment because the question came to me out of left field, so to speak. And I said, we lost our republic in January of 2025 when this new president returned to the White House and began his first 100 days in office. I said the only question now for America is whether we can recapture that republic that we have already lost.
Do you have any thoughts and reflect? Yeah, on the Declaration of Independence, which is very specific in its articles about the violations of human rights and legal rights in relationship to what we're going through now. What are your reflections on that document as we approach the 4th of July and what we're now experiencing?
Well, thank you for that question, Sidney. I really began thinking about the Declaration of Independence first, with the new president came into office in January, because, as you know, for the past 2 years, in one way or another, I have been trying to tell the American people that this president acted like a king, and if reelected or if elected again to the office, he would govern as a king. Now, I don't fault anyone for not thinking that a possibility, but I was just like the two of you were. I was listening to every word the man spoke and every action he took. And I knew what I spoke. So on January 20th, 2025, on his first day in office, he began to carry through with his promise to the American people, and it almost verbatim, to be a king. And with every single initiative since that first day in office, he has acted like a king in the exact same style and manner as King George III did. And of course, it was King George III's conduct as a tyrant, a monarchical tyrant, that led the American colonists to declare their independence from the British Crown, to fight the Revolutionary War for its independence, and having won that war, to establish in the United States of America and for the United States of America a democracy, and a democracy under the rule of law. And Donald Trump has targeted literally every single one of those foundational values, principles, and even the institutions that we created over the past 250 years following our Revolutionary War with Great Britain. So most recently, I've tried my hand at a piece for this July 4th, 2025, in which I would articulate for history, if history's interested, 27 self-evident truths in America today. And then I have lined up each of the 27 grievances against the king that are contained in the Declaration of Independence, married each up with the relevant truth of the 27 truths that I have drafted.
People sometimes forget that the Declaration of Independence, quite apart from its wonderful beginning, was a list of grievances, 27 grievances that the Congress had against the British Crown. That's the real substance of it in some ways, all those grievances, which never get remembered. But you say, Judge, that we have our own grievances that are tallied up with ones from 1776.
That's exactly right, Sean. And in fact, the parallels between the grievances against the crown in 1776 and the grievances that Americans have against this president of the United States, the parallels are astonishing, Sean.
Oh, well, give us some examples.
Well, I had referenced in the Atlantic piece, of course, the signature initiatives, the two leading signature initiatives of this president, of course, are immigration and deportation, and tariffs.
It's all in the Declaration, isn't it?
Yes, Sidney. Yes, and no one should be under any illusions. I had no earthly idea myself until I laid eyes on the Declaration of Independence again for the first time in I don't know how many years. And then I started going through the individual 27 grievances. And Sidney, I was astonished. I was astonished at how well they line up exactly with the conduct of this incumbent president of the United States, which is, so the way the treatise would be written, is that Americans today indeed have the same almost identical grievances against Donald Trump that the American colonists had against King George III.
The first complaint or article in the Declaration after the appeal to the decent opinion of mankind is that he has refused his assent to laws, the most wholesome and necessary for the public good. What's your view?
Well, first off, those words are not just profound, they're melodious. They every single word captures, as they were intended to do, America and what we would come to stand for and represent before the world. So we'll take as many examples as you want. I just want to warn you that in probably the style of the two of you, I am riveted and consumed by each one of the 27.
Sure.
But that one, of course, was especially important to me because, my wheelhouse, if you will, is the rule of law. And several of the 27 grievances were directed at the king's abdication of the rule of law against the colonists only. And the words were just, they're beautiful, powerful words that would give rise to a revolution and did give rise to a revolution. And all of the grievances can be summed up in this way. And let me just think for a moment. But the grievances were against the king for the suspension of law and the imposition of arbitrary law. Arbitrary law that, of course, ended up in the denial of the rights, liberties, and freedoms of the colonists. And of course, that's exactly where, I came into the picture thinking about it. As you know, I have charged the current president with the corruption of American democracy and the rule of law. And again, not to beat a dead horse, but it can't be overemphasized. Every single thing this president has done, certainly over the past 5 years, so as to include January 6th and the intervening 4 years, has represented the corruption of America's democracy and rule of law in actually a worse way than the king did almost 250 years ago. I say it's worse. It's far worse for this reason. We are the United States of America today. And the president of the United States is the last person on earth who should corrupt America's democracy and rule of law, but intentionally, deliberately try to corrupt America's democracy and rule of law. That's why we are today not just in a constitutional crisis. America itself is in a crisis, just of the kind that Sean suggested at the beginning of the program.
Existential crisis.
Existential crisis, yes.
But in 1776, as we historians know, it was directed against the crown, to be sure, as the tyrant. But the tyrant had help. The tyrant didn't act alone. The tyrant had his ministers. And there are ministers around this president, I think, who are doing as much as they can, quite deliberately, in fact, in ways probably more deliberate than the president, whose understanding of American law probably is fairly minimal. But there are those around him who are very much aware, as well as institutions, and I dare say we agree about this too, where the Supreme Court of the United States has not been particularly helpful in trying to rein in this tyranny. But there are lots of others we could point to, no?
Yes. And as you were talking, the two individuals around the president that came to mind, of course, were Stephen Miller and the Attorney General of the United States, Pam Bondi. Every statement. Well, first off, Stephen Miller is the spokesperson for the law in this administration. The Attorney General is largely a puppet. Stephen Miller, and I don't know anything about him, but he's an intelligent person. And when he speaks about the law in the grandest, most profound ways that he has, as an example, suspension of the writ of habeas corpus, and the grandest concepts in constitutional law, he knows what he's talking about.
Mm-hmm.
But here's my point. He is intentionally misstating the law and deceiving the American people as to the law. The Attorney General, of course, is just in a class of her own, but she's been really the point person in savaging the federal judiciary, and savaging is too light a word. This is the Attorney General of the United States who goes out every day, and calls the federal judges as a group, and then individual judges as the need arises, kooks, rogues, who are deliberately interpreting the Constitution and laws of the United States in their own partisan way, with the sole objective of defeating this president's agenda. I'll leave it to you guys, but I guarantee you no words such as those have ever passed the lips of any Attorney General of the United States, ever. And God help us if we ever have another Attorney General who will speak that way about the federal judiciary.
Stephen Miller has been posting pictures of judges, attacks on judges on the internet, and there are real consequences. Even Chief Justice Roberts has talked about the threats to judges, and I wonder what your thoughts are about this deliberately created hostility and animus toward the judiciary. And I must say, it's in the Declaration as well.
Yes.
That the king has obstructed the administration of justice
right.
by refusing his assent to laws for establishing judiciary powers, and he has made judges dependent on his will alone. And that seems to me to be his objective.
Exactly.
No question. But in this instance, the means by which this president has done it are far more aggravated than King George, beginning with the fact that for 250 years, we have had an independent judiciary by design and intent of the Declaration and the Constitution of the United States. And you have yet today the President of the United States attempting every single day to delegitimize the federal courts, including the Supreme Court, in the eyes of the American people. And unfortunately, regrettably, he is succeeding in that thus far. So most recently, I think the Washington Post asked me for a comment last week on something. It might have been the injunction case. I can't remember. But in any event, I ended my quote, and the Washington Post ended its article with my quote, that this will continue. All of this, meaning the president and the attorney general's savaging of the federal judiciary, until or unless the Supreme Court at least tries to put a stop to it. And those were deliberate words, Sean and Sidney, for this reason. The Supreme Court has accommodated this president at every turn thus far. It was only when the president was calling for the impeachment of federal judges and Elon Musk calling for the impeachment of all federal judges who rule against Donald Trump's agenda that and the violence that those calls for cat calls, if you will, for violence against federal judges actually materialized. That the Chief Justice, who was a long time and dear friend of mine, finally came forward to say something. Now, as far as I'm concerned, he would have been better off saying nothing than what he did. You'll recall what he said was nothing more than impeachment is not the answer to judges that rule against a party. And it never has been for 250 years. Does he really think that Donald Trump cares one whit about that? Of course not. And it didn't slow him down 1 second. Fast forward to last week's decision on the nationwide injunction case. And well, I'll put it this way. I'll reverse the order. The 2 days after, the chief was speaking to a judicial conference somewhere, and he said something like, "We have to tamp down the rhetoric against the federal courts. All parties, all of us." Very offensive to me personally, and I hope you too. But then, the reversed order, the day before, the day after, or the day of the decision, the Attorney General, was standing there talking about the decision with the President of the United States standing by her side, trashing the federal judiciary, calling them every name in the book, rogue judges who don't follow the law and are only on their partisan agendas to defeat this president. All of this, she says. Then she calls out the individual judges, the individual district courts, and the individual courts of appeals, guys.
Yeah.
It says these courts by name are nothing but politicians in black robes. My point for our discussion today is the Chief Justice of the United States knew damn well that that's exactly what the President of the United States would say and what his Attorney General would say in response to the court's ruling. And the Chief Justice has a higher responsibility than to respond to that by saying, all of us need to tamp down our rhetoric.
Yeah.
The Supreme Court it is no longer possible for the Supreme Court to stop this president.
Yes, and what you say, I mean, she's literally putting targets on their backs. And this is a regime of violence, among other things. But just to continue with the Declaration for a second, Judge, you brought up the name Elon Musk a little while ago. And I really am struck by how much the events today parallel those in 1776. One of the grievances in 1776 against the king was that he has erected a multitude of new offices and sent hither swarms of officers to harass our people and eat out their substance. That sounds very much like Elon Musk, doesn't it?
I love you, Professor. That was, I studied the Declaration for, 25 hours before I began parsing every word and aligning each grievance up with my 27 self-evident truths. I found this one late, and I literally was sitting where I'm sitting here now, and I laughed out loud. And just so you you historians rightly think you're smarter than all of us, but
No, we don't. No, we don't.
the word was not offices, it was departments. Departments. And when I saw that, Sean, I said, this goes with Doge.
Yeah.
And that's where it is in my written piece.
Yeah.
I love this. I love it.
Yeah. Oh, it's perfect, and eats out the possibilities. I mean, the wording is so perfect. Go ahead, Sid.
Yeah. You are a friend of the Chief Justice. Is he unaware of what is going on around him, and that he and the others are enabling this?
John, my friend, is one of the smartest people I've ever met in my life. There is nothing that John Roberts is not aware of. And at the top of that list, Sidney, is self-awareness.
Mm-hmm.
He knows everything that's going on. And that's why I've been so disappointed in him. And I understand the issues, the two issues that plague him. One is the internal workings of the court itself, and I'll say no more, but you know what I'm talking about.
Sure.
And then his unforgivable reticence to speak out directly against the President of the United States of America when he knows and the rest of the world knows that this is the President of the United States of America. So, it was unforgivable, in my view, for the chief to continue to make these broad statements, meaningless statements, and attribute the misconduct to all of us. All of us. Sidney, I'm looking at you. Obviously, the Chief Justice has said, you, the Democrats, are every bit as responsible for this as the Republicans. That's offensive.
Yeah. Well, it's classic abdication of intellectual responsibility and hiding behind the cliche of on the one hand and on the other hand, as though you're actually even-handed, whereas in fact you're stating a falsehood.
Exactly.
Another question, though, about the Chief Justice, because I once heard him say that no Chief Justice of the United States is ever going to match the example of John Marshall. That's as high as it gets. No one can ever hope to reach that level. But that every Chief Justice was also worried about reaching the depths of Roger B. Taney. Do you think, you know him, is he aware of how far his reputation, let alone that of his court, is descending under the current events?
Yes, for the reasons that I gave.
So he gets it.
He knows everything, Sean, that there is to know about the Supreme Court, the perceptions of the Supreme Court, the institution of the Supreme Court under the Constitution of the United States, and the politics surrounding the Supreme Court. There is no one smarter than John Roberts as to all of that. Mm-hmm. So in answer to your question, he knows perfectly well.
Well, does he care about historical judgment or only live in the present?
That's the conflict that Sean's suggesting, and that's the question that we will never know. That's not to say that we cannot make eminently rational decisions about what he has done. And that's where I say, I don't know what he's thinking or what he intends, what he wishes, the moment or history. But I believe I can say, and I know the two of you know that you can say, he has made the decision between the moment and history already. Mm-hmm. And it cannot be, he cannot recover that decision, if you will.
Mm. I wonder if in conclusion, well, you want to say something, Sean? I'm sorry.
Well, I just want one more question about the violence of it, though, because this is getting beyond a question of history and present. This is a question of responsibility to the federal judiciary, of which the Chief Justice is, of course, the head. By calling out by name various federal judges, the Attorney General is doing more than just naming them. She's putting, I believe, a target on their back. That the numbers of death threats that have come before federal judges over the last 8 years have skyrocketed. That there's even talk, I mean, I may have gotten this from you, Judge, that the federal judges are no longer secure in their idea that the U.S. Marshals can actually protect them. Now, this strikes me as something that goes beyond, this is just taking care of your people, keeping them away from the possibility of being murdered. And we know that people are being murdered out there because in Minnesota, we just saw what happened. There's no reason to believe that can't become more general, especially if you're naming specific judges. Does he have no sense of what is at stake here with his own people?
Well, again, but so framed, it's not even possible that he could not understand the gravity of it. So I'll take you back for one vignette. I was in New York a few weeks ago on another matter unrelated to the law, and Nicole Wallace called and said, "Judge, would you ever agree just to walk across the street and come on to my show this afternoon?" And I said, "Well, gosh, Nicole, I'm in a board meeting." I said, "What? I'd do anything for you. What do you want?" And she said, "I'm having Judge Salas on." And I said, I will be there. And she said, "Please," she said, "Judge Salas is going to tell her story." And for your audience, Judge Salas is the sitting federal judge whose son was killed at her front door,
right?
Whose husband was shot in an attempted murder because of a case she had, and this was maybe 5 years ago, something like that. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But Nicole, said, "Look, Judge, I don't want Judge Salas to have to answer any questions or say anything." She said, "Please come so I can ask you questions." And I said, mm-hmm. I'd be honored to. So one of the questions was the marshal's question, by the way. But then when she turned to the court, Nicole, said, "Judge, would it be helpful for Chief Justice John Roberts to be sitting here with us today?" And I said, "Nicole, it would not just be helpful. It's obligatory. It's a profound obligation. It's his highest obligation as Chief Justice of the United States to speak for the safety of the federal judges in this country." And I said, his problem is that would require condemning the President of the United States. And I said, in my view, so be it. But right now, today, the Chief Justice of the United States is sitting on that fact. And I can't even imagine that the federal judges aren't sitting there wondering what on earth is going on when the Supreme Court of the United States refuses to prevent violence and murders of the federal judges in this country, I couldn't look myself in the mirror.
Yeah, and you mean threats to them?
Absolutely.
Yes, and
very real threats.
You know,
I mean, these are not just idle.
Yeah, the violent rhetoric is not idle, because we know that there are individuals out there who hear them almost as orders. And we may say they're unhinged or that they're lone gunmen or so on. But those who speak in this way are very conscious of the deliberate effect. And we have seen numerous incidents, including the one you mentioned about Judge Salas, but also many others, and lately in Minnesota. So these are not idle threats.
No, they are not. And they are coming from the Oval Office and the sacred Department of Justice, or the once sacred Department of Justice.
Well, we're coming to July 4th. I'd like to find some way to give us some sort of sense of elevation. It's a terrible, terrible time. We all are agreed about that. But Judge, I want to give you the last word. Looking at the 4th of July, how would you tell our viewers, our listeners, to take that day and to make the most of it against this terrible regime? I mean, what do you think we should do? What should we be thinking?
Yes.
I have an answer, but I didn't come up with the answer myself, Sean. I had a couple of our dearest friends were here last week, and we were talking over all this, and they said every July 4th in their family's history, together, they recite their Declaration of Independence, every single word of it. I can think of nothing better on this July 4th than to do that in every household and every family across America, and think about what those words meant then to our fellow Americans almost 250 years ago, and what those words prophetically mean to we the people today, on the eve of the 250th anniversary of this great nation.
I can add nothing to that. For Judge Luttig, for Sidney Blumenthal, happy 4th of July, everyone. Read the Declaration. This is the Court of History, and we'll see you next time.
Can't get your fill of Legal AF? Me neither. That's why we formed the Legal AF Substack. Every time we mention something in a hot take, whether it's a court filing or a oral argument, come over to the Substack. You'll find the court filing and the oral argument there, including a daily roundup that I do called, wait for it, Morning AF. What else? All the other contributors from Legal AF are there as well. We got some new reporting. We got interviews. We got ad-free versions of the podcast and hot takes. Where? Legal AF on Substack. Come over now to free subscribe.